Welcome back, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome Paul Debevec back to CVMP. Paul Debevec is a senior staff scientist at Google Research and an adjunct research professor at the USC ICT Institute. And Paul is a bit of a magician when it comes to light. So ever since his initial seminal work on image-based lighting and the light stage, I've really followed his work with great interest. And I look forward to what he has to share with us today, working on light fields, light stages, and how this connects to virtual production. Paul, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Christian. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Excellent. Let me know if there's any technical difficulties. And it's great to be speaking here at CVMP. Unfortunately, under remote circumstances, I've had the chance to attend CVMP a few times since it started. I think I even attended the first one in London in the Savoy Hotel, if I remember accurately. And it's just, I just looked at all of the topics covered by CVMP, and you had to check the box as to whether you're interested in them. And like every single box was a huge check mark. So thank you so much for having this conference that has this particular focus. I think it's a very interesting one. Let me go ahead and try to share my slides. And I have indeed some things to speak about on the topics that you mentioned of light fields, light stages, and the future of virtual production. And as you mentioned, I'm Paul Debevec. I am jointly at Google Research and the USC Institute for Creative Technologies, both in offices in Los Angeles, California. And you mentioned also, Christian mentioned the work that I'd done some time ago. It's over 20 years now in the area of image-based lighting. These were things that I did back in the University of California at Berkeley. And I was very excited by visual effects and the possibility of taking computer-generated objects and making them look like they were really there in a scene when they weren't really there in a scene. And dissatisfied with how manual the process was when I looked into how people were doing it, I thought, shouldn't there be a way to record the light in the scene and then simulate that measurement of the light on computer-generated objects? And so that started the investigations into high dynamic range photography, and then high dynamic range panoramas, which are these light probe images that tell you the color and intensity of the light coming from every direction. These can have pixel values, contrast ratios 10,000 to 1, 100,000 to 1 pretty easily. And I made a couple computer animations, one that put some spheres on a pedestal lit by the light of the UC Berkeley eucalyptus grove, and one that took spheres and monoliths and put them into St. Peter's Basilica, actually a photogrammetry reconstruction of St. Peter's Basilica, so we could do some camera moves in there. And these are films I made with some other Berkeley students in the late 90s that we showed at SIGGRAPH. And it was a absolute delight to see that some other people picked up on it. And nowadays, when there's a CGI character that needs to go into a movie, very likely the visual effects crew will go out there with a fisheye lens or a mirror ball and shoot a high dynamic range image of the illumination, and then use global illumination techniques to light those characters with those measurements of real light. There's another application that people are using a lot these days too, where we need to put computer generated objects into a scene, and that is smartphone augmented reality. And in fact, looking at how Pikachu shows up in Pokemon Go, you'll notice that the camera tracking is getting a little better these days, but the image-based lighting on the scene still had a ways to go, because there wasn't a way to send out a visual effects crew for everyone holding a smartphone trying to do augmented reality to measure the light in the scene and then simulate that light on the character. And this is challenging because when you don't have a mirror ball, all you have is the background image that you want to put the object into. And obviously there's some cues as to what the lighting should be. If there weren't, then you probably couldn't get the lighting all that wrong. But you want to light the object in a way that it's consistent and believable with the lighting in the rest of the scene. But this is challenging. We not only don't have high dynamic range, we don't even see all of the lighting directions around. In fact, a typical cell phone camera sees about 7% of all of the lighting directions around it. And that's challenging because if you don't have all those directions, you don't know where the light is coming from. You don't know what colors and intensities of light. And if you don't have high dynamic range, you might light an object in a way that it misses most of the illumination in the scene. As you can see here, there's a low dynamic range image lighting this object on the left with clip highlights. But if you use the full dynamic range, it gives you a much more realistic and engaging appearance. So we decided to try to come up with an algorithm that figures out a plausible idea for what the omnidirectional lighting should be for a scene just based on the background image. And no surprise, we took a deep learning approach. And to train our algorithm, we found a way to shoot lots of training data that has background images plus a record of what the illumination should have been in that scene. And that involved building a funny little device like this, where a stick holds 3 reflective spheres in the bottom of the field of view of a cell phone video. And this is some work shown at CVPR 2019 by Chloe Legendre et al. In our group. And if you take a look at how the framing works, you see most of the image in the background. But then at the bottom, there's these 3 reflective spheres. There's a mirror sphere, a diffuse sphere, and a matte silver sphere. And with these 3 BRDFs, or reflectance properties of the spheres, it basically tells you everything you need to know about the high dynamic range lighting information of the scene just in one photograph. There's basically only one HDR lighting environment that would light a mirror ball to look like that, and a diffuse ball to look like that, and a matte silver ball to look like that. And all of these are Christmas ornaments, by the way. One of them you have to paint with automotive primer paint, the diffuse one. Nobody puts diffuse gray balls on their Christmas tree, although you just gave me an idea. So you get all of this training data. Let's take a look at it. Here we go. We actually built, I think, 4 of these rigs total, and we captured millions of images just by shooting video with our Pixel cell phone going around. And we had people do it in a few different cities. And then it's pretty clear how to train the network. We have background plates. We have the HDR light probes that we can derive from the spheres. And then we train a network to regress to the sphere. And we use also a generative adversarial network to synthesize some of the high frequency detail that you would see in the mirror sphere that's probably not evident just in your typical background image. It's unlikely that there's a mirror sphere in the scene that would tell you the high frequency lighting. So you have to kind of imagine it. And it imagines it pretty well. So to take a look at a few results for our algorithm here, we call it environmental HDR, and it's actually part of ARCore, which is the augmented reality platform inside the Android platform. And these are some synthetic rocket ships that have been rendered into scenes using automatically figured out lighting just from the background plate. And I wouldn't say that this is the quality that Weta Digital or Digital Domain or Industrial Light and Magic would do if they had to composite this rocket into the scene. But it's pretty good for running completely automatically and in real time on a cell phone. Those are things you have to keep reminding yourself. We're trying to do what visual effects crews can do in real time on a cell phone completely automatically. And the results were good enough. It actually ships. People use this in lots of different augmented reality systems. And we actually continued this work because we were wondering if we could get more robust illumination, higher quality illumination, and more relevant illumination out of an image if the image happens to have something in it that is a bit familiar to you. In particular, we wondered if we could use a human face as a light probe. Now, human faces obviously have a great deal of variety. There's different skin tones, different shapes, different facial hair. So it's not really a calibration object. It's not a mirror ball or a color chart. But there's a wide variety of similarity in faces. And it seemed like we could train a special version of this algorithm on faces. And this is work that's being presented this week, a little bit later, by Chloe Legendre et al. At SIGGRAPH Asia 2020. So I think it's been timed so that CVMP, the second that it ends, you can go right into more virtual talk attendance with SIGGRAPH Asia. And there's some amazing work that's going to be there. So how did we train this algorithm? Well, we wanted to train on a wide variety of subjects because we wanted to be able to understand the lighting of hopefully any face. And we had a chance to bring 70 different people who had a wide range of ages, gender, obviously, and skin tone. And we brought them into our new light stage device that we've built at Google, which is a 3.5 meter sphere with 331 computer-controlled LEDs on it that we can shoot one light at a time data, where we light one light source one after the other to record what we call the reflectance field of the face. And the device actually has about 100 cameras on it. We use it for full body volumetric capture as well, and I'll show a video of that later in the talk. But we have, for this data set collect, we had 6 cameras aimed at the face, basically 5 different viewpoints. And one of the viewpoint has a second camera right next to it that sees it in somewhat higher resolution. So those are the viewpoints you can see over here. And then this is 24 out of the 331 lighting directions you can see. And it shoots very quickly. The person holds the pose and it's only a couple of seconds to get this data. And each person is asked to make several different facial expressions, and each person also does a couple of wardrobe changes. So we get different clothing, and they'll put on hats and sunglasses and stick out their tongue. Everything we could think of to try to make it as wide a data set as possible. And we even also included a alpha channel. One of our lighting conditions turns off the light on the face and just lights the background behind to see them in silhouette for a good alpha channel. So from this data, we can use the classical image-based relighting technique, where we multiply the images of the face by the color and intensity of the light that should be coming from that direction, which you can see here. This is the Grace Cathedral light probe. We've multiplied these images of the face here. This is from our 2000 paper with the first light stage. And if you add all those images together, once they've been multiplied by those RGBs, then it relights the face according to that novel lighting environment. And since we also have a background plate, we can essentially use those lighting environments and backgrounds that we captured in our previous project to create synthetically renderings of the faces as if they were in all of those environments and composited into the background. So we produce what should look like natural images of faces in natural environments lit by the light of that environment, and of wide variety, including sunlight and shadow and indoors and outdoors. And for each one of these, if you look closely, you can see these 3 little spheres in the upper right. We actually know the lighting by design. We know the ground truth of what the illumination should be because we created the lighting on these faces. So at that point, we can train a neural network with images of the face going in, and this is what the lighting should be coming out. This high dynamic range, 32 by 32. It's not super high res, but does have some detail. HDR light probe image. And we make it a little bit more efficient. We automatically do a face detector. We crop to just a little bit around the face, send that in so the network doesn't have to learn how to detect the face. And the result also includes multi-scale adversarial loss to kind of synthesize the additional detail in the mirror ball that you might expect to have, but probably isn't totally visible in a face. And let's see some results. These are 2 different faces on the left that are the input to the algorithm, and they haven't been seen in the training. They happen to have also been people that were recorded in the light stage so that we can see if we got the answer right. So these are synthetically created images of them in a different natural illumination environment, but they weren't used in training, not at all, no expressions of them whatsoever. There's the lighting. And so one question you could ask is, if we have a different face and we light them with these lighting estimates, does the face look like it's lit consistently? And the answer is here. These are 2 other people. Notice they have different skin tones as the original people. And it both seems plausible. Both of these people seem, I think, equally plausible that they could have been in that same background as the source person. But a better way to test how well the algorithm is doing is that since we knew the lighting on the left side, we could actually light them with the ground truth lighting, these new people, and see what they really should have looked like under that lighting. And that's this answer right here. And the result looks, at first glance, basically identical. Somehow the algorithm has learned well enough to pull the lighting off of one face and put it onto a different face. In fact, even to put it onto a different face of a considerably different skin tone, somehow deconflicting the effect of the reflectivity of the face and the amount of light in the scene to relight the new faces. And we actually can show that we're doing a better relighting than just using, say, the first 9 spherical harmonics of the lighting. Because if you do that, you kind of dull out the specular highlights. And we get a better result if we use our full resolution 32 by 32 probe. So in this next slide, you can actually see a real-time result where we're analyzing video of our co-author Jay Bush, and she's holding a matte silver sphere. And from her face, not from the matte silver sphere, I think that was even cropped out for the analysis, the algorithm is analyzing that and then generating what a synthetic matte silver sphere would look like in the upper right. And it's not exactly the same, but it is basically pretty consistent, surprisingly consistent. Here's another example. On the left, we have a in the wild image of a face. The photo is not from a light stage, it's an actual photo of a person standing out in the sun. And we're going to estimate the lighting off of this person's face, and we're going to use it to illuminate a CGI model of a digital human. This is actually a really good CGI model of a digital human modeled by Ian Spriggs. And we're going to render it in V-Ray with those IBLs that we got off of the face. And hopefully this image will look like it's lit pretty consistently with the original photo. And I think this one matches pretty well. We can do another example with different lighting in the shade, pull the lighting off of this guy's face, light our CGI model. Again, that is a CGI model, even though it looks like a totally real person because Ian Spriggs is amazing. And you can see those match pretty well too. And for one last example, I'll show another real-time result where we're pulling lighting off of a face in real time in video. And we actually can even run this on a cell phone. And we're lighting a shinier object in the background, these digital balloons. And this is a good showing of kind of the temporal consistency of the illumination. So we're analyzing, you know, as she moves her face around a little bit, the different expressions. And the lighting on the background stays reasonably consistent. So that was good news for us. So amazing, good data plus a well-crafted machine learning network can solve a real problem quite successfully. So this is a project about taking a face that's already lit and pulling the lighting off of it. Throughout our efforts that we've done at USC ICT and at Google, we've also been interested in recording the lighting from somewhere else and then putting it back onto the face. And there's a device that we built now 18 years ago, actually like 19 years ago, because this is about the time when we were publishing or writing our SIGGRAPH paper, called Light Stage 3, and it did this very literally. It was a sphere of RGB color LEDs that you could drive automatically with the light of various HDRI mounts of different image-based lighting environments to light an actor standing right in front of you live with the RGB spatially varying, angularly varying lighting all around you. And we put in a live compositing system. We actually had a RGB color camera and an infrared camera on a beam splitter. The black cloth behind the actor is infrared reflective, and so we get an IR matting system that's live. And we could record the actors in the scene, composite them in, and they matched pretty well. Our paper was called A Lighting Reproduction Approach to Live Action Compositing at SIGGRAPH 2002. And just to show a couple of results, here's our Grace Cathedral light probe. And there's some software that in real time would convert that into kind of this lower resolution version on the lights of the light stage. We had, I think, 20 lights around the equator and 156 lights total. You got a quick glimpse of the infrared compositing map there. And then this is our friend Emily, lit by the light of Grace Cathedral and composited into it. I was actually able to use the lights themselves as eye lines to direct the actor to have her look at the stained glass windows above her. This is a different environment with a different friend, Alana, composited into the light of the Galleria degli Uffizi in Florence. And then we also wanted to show a result with a virtual set. So we used Arnold. Marcus Fajardo was a member of our lab at the time to render this set of the Parthenon. We lit it in the late afternoon and rendered a virtual light probe that basically comes into sunlight and into shadow and into sunlight and into shadow. And we asked Alana to just walk in place in the light stage while we played back this lighting environment on her as she walks forward. And the result is that she actually walks into shadow and walks back into sunlight. And you see the lighting changes on her, and you even see the effect of the indirect light from those color banners on the other side of the blue banners and the red banners that give the other side of her face a little bit of a blue or a red cast as she walks by. So we're happy to get that result. And our device actually did get used for production in a couple of feature films. One of them was the first one, Spider-Man 3, where Sony ImageWorks asked if we could crank up the Light Stage 3 device to illuminate real actors in costume with some of the classic light probe lighting environments and some of their own HDRIs, so that they're digital artists building the digital versions, which use data from a different light stage, one light at a time data from Light Stage 2. And they could match the digital appearance and shaders to how the real actors really looked in some of these lighting conditions. And a really fun use was for this David Fincher movie called The Social Network, where this actor, Armie Hammer, on the right, played a dual role of both of the Winklevoss twins in the film. And in some of the shots, they only shot Armie as one of them, and they had Josh Pence play the other one. And they didn't have them swapped, like, for example, in this one where they're rowing a boat. So they did have HDRIs of that environment. And we were asked if we could play those HDR environments back onto Armie Hammer, where it was recorded with 3 red cameras. And so the visual effects crew could make a rough photogrammetry model of the face and use these relit images, or these lighting playback, this lighting reproduction on his face, to create the real-time texture map that would go onto the background plate. And the final shot was done using these techniques by Lolo Visual Effects. And you can see that the fellow in the back looks lit very consistently to the fellow in the front. And that was the idea. Very few people realized that there was a lot of visual effects going on in this shot. And Armie Hammer was good at acting the scene twice, actually. Going a little bit further forward, one of the things that I am happiest about the SIGGRAPH 2002 paper is the future work section, because the vision really was that this could become a general purpose virtual production system, where the light stage, the LEDs surrounding your actors, are keeping them lit the right way for whatever environment that you're compositing them into. And the future work section lays out about 10 different ways to extend this to make this into a general purpose production tool, including making a bigger stage and a special light source for the sun, figuring out how to do shadows onto the ground, and spatially varying light on the actors, improving the matting system and the color rendition of the lights. And the final slide that I showed when I was giving the talk at SIGGRAPH 2002 looked like this. And it was a big scale light stage, which did have its own special light source for a super bright light for the sun. I think it was about 50 feet in diameter. It had a motion control camera that can move back and forth and film the actors from just the right angle. It had lights on the floor. And while we didn't build Light Stage 4 immediately after we built Light Stage 3, we did have a chance to build this vision of a system in collaboration with a visual effects company in Beijing, China, called SOOVii, S-O-O-V-I-I. And in 2017, this thing went live. It has about 1,200 of our special multispectral color light sources from USC ICT. It has a special light up floor. And I got to give a tour, or I got to have a tour of this, where they actually show a live demo of compositing somebody into a scene that has already been shot. And this is actually their biggest use case for visual effects production, is that they have a scene that's already been shot with other actors. And of course, there's some lighting on their faces. And they have a semi-automated way of estimating what the lighting on the actors' faces are and then mapping that lighting onto the light stage so that anyone sitting in the light stage gets lit the same way as what those scenes were that were already shot. And they have a little bit of green screen. And they showed this to me. They had me pose, they even had me act a few scenes so they could composite some video in. And the result is that they were able to light me same way as some of the actors in this Chinese television show. And they actually edited, me in as if I'm reacting to some of the things that they're saying, which I did not understand because they were actually in Chinese. And hopefully the lighting on me looks pretty consistent to the lighting of everybody else, because that's the point. And otherwise, that's a much more manual process where you might have gaffers moving lights around and a lot of eyeballing things. Here, there's a much more streamlined process. So now, let's take a look at some actual footage of their productions. This fellow playing this doctor wasn't there when the TV show actually was shot. They realized that they needed to change who played a character after the fact in about 60 episodes of a TV series. And so all of these scenes here, they estimated the lighting off of the original people that were in the scene, and then they reproduced that lighting in the light stage so they could composite the actor in. And the result of the technology being as automated as it is that they can actually do this actor replacement in about 80 shots a day. That's a lot to get done. If they can do a long day, they can get 100 shots. And they managed to put this guy into this show. He wasn't the lead actor, but he was like the second lead actor. And they managed to put him into hundreds of shots over a 60 episode TV series in about 2 months. And they still made their release date for the show, which is impressive. One of the other things that we thought about back in 2002 is lighting resolution. And we knew that with just 156 lights, which is how many I could afford to buy back then on the grant that we had, if you zoomed in close on eyes, you would see all these little reflections. And if somebody were wearing sunglasses, you might have some trouble. If they were wearing a shiny helmet, for example, you might have a little bit of trouble. And that really, the ultimate thing to do would be to put the lights so close together that you would get clear reflections. And in fact, the paper says that you ideally should have the lights so dense that the system would display an image of the environment to the actor that's inside of it, which of course is a nice thing for the actors too. And right around that time, after we published the paper, we started becoming aware of this magical technology called LED panels that we know now. And in 2004, I was asked by visual effects company Digital Domain if we could potentially use our light stage technology to light the actor Brad Pitt with HDRs they were recording on set, so that his eye region, his eyeballs and the skin around them could be recorded in the light stage in a way that they could composite this part of his face onto an older version of himself. And that's the original idea of how they wanted to do The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And I knew that if they got zoomed in on Brad Pitt's eyes, we'd see all these little reflections, but I was aware of LED panels. And so I did this sketch of surrounding an actor by LED panels and using them as illumination. I called it an eye light stage there. And we found a company up in the valley that didn't build the entire cylinder of LED panels that we were interested in, but they built one wall of it. And we got it fired up with some of our favorite image-based lighting environments. We brought in light meters and mirror spheres and all ways to try to calibrate this information. And we had an actor stand in front of this wall, we put a camera right at the wall, and we recorded how the illumination of the Grace Cathedral light probe reflected in the actors' eyes. And you can see the reflections were fantastic. It looked like the stained glass windows and the altar of the Grace Cathedral light probe. It provided the other sources of illumination on the actor as well. And we knew this would be a good way to go. However, in the 4 years from 2004 to 2008 that Digital Domain had to work on it, they got so good at rendering computer-generated eyes and eye regions for the Benjamin Button character that they didn't need to use this technique. But it did, in a roundabout way, lead to the work that we did on the other David Fincher movie, The Social Network, which also led to some of the work that we did on another movie directed by Alfonso Cuarón and with an amazing director of photography, Emmanuel Lubezki, where two characters who play astronauts had to be composited into lots of computer-generated material that was very dynamic, that involved people floating and spinning, running away from explosions or shooting away from explosions. And we did this test in the Light Stage at Light Stage LLC in Burbank with stand-in actors for who would eventually be Sandra Bullock and George Clooney, playing back image-based lighting environments on them to see how effective the compositing could be. And we did these tests with Framestore, and Framestore went on to build the high resolution version with hired LED panels in the UK, where they filmed the film. And they, just like we had done for our Light Stage 3 project, pre-rendered the CGI environments in Arnold, and then they played them back on the light box on this light stage made of LED panels about 3 meters on a side to produce this accurate dynamic illumination on Sandra Bullock and George Clooney's faces, so that then when they were composited and filmed from the right direction from a motion control camera on a track, they could be composited into the scenes of the film and look like they were really there in space, going through the space station, fixing the space telescope. And you might ask then, well, at what point did people think this is such a great idea? We've got to really go big with this. Let's make the entire set as big as what we'd shown for Light Stage 4 surrounding actors with LEDs. And that happened a few years later, actually for a Chinese film called Asura, which at the time was the biggest motion picture production in all of Chinese history. And visual effects supervisor Charlie Iturriaga designed and got built, amazingly, the world's largest LED panel stage back in 2016 that was 26 meters long, 20 meters wide, and 8.5 meters tall. And it had lights on all the walls, panels on the ceiling. The ceiling could move up and down so they could poke lights in through the edges, LEDs all over the floor. And they used it in this way, where they would often build a little bit of the set or the ground plane physically for real. So here's some nice grass and flowers here. They would display the environment all around the actors and on the panels above the actors. And since the LED panels weren't always quite high enough resolution to show up well in camera, they would often also shoot their shots where they would track the camera frustum and put blue screen right in the area of the camera frustum so that they could do the composite there. And the rest of everything is rendered from the perspective of the actors. And so here's one of the scenes where they've lit the actors with lighting from on top of this beautiful mountaintop. And then here's the composite that they've done in the final film, and it looks pretty good. They did elaborate visual effects in this movie, including wire work that had stunts going on inside this LED stage. And you can see a bit of that here. They had a big scene at the end in this throne room, with this very powerful ruler here. And the throne room, it's amazing production design. They didn't have to build all that much of it because they could just display it on the LED panels And it not only shows up in the background, but it also lights the actors. So it's a much more realistic composite than you might have gotten with green screen. Or certainly it's a safer composite to do because you can really see how it looks on set. They built interactive lighting tools with like an iPad interface. They could interactively move the lighting around to light the actors from every different angle that they needed to. Here in the lower right, you can see a scene where there's kind of this luminous creature floating around, and you can see the interactive lighting it puts on the actors' faces. And since then, we have seen this technology, this technique of surrounding actors with LEDs to light them right for photoreal compositing used in more and more productions. The First Man movie, the Westworld television show, the Mandalorian TV show, all of those have made use of surrounding LED panels to get the lighting right for real-time visual effects work. And this image here is from a nice demo done by people who worked on the Mandalorian season 1 called Lux Machina that they did at SIGGRAPH 2019. They showed some lighting reflecting off of this fellow and his motorcycle. Now, one of the things that I mentioned was another area of future work is that regardless of whether you're using individual light sources or LED panels, these LEDs are making their color with a combination of red and green and blue LEDs. And if you look at the spectrum of red and green and blue LEDs, you have basically, I wouldn't say spikes of spectral detail, but these peaks of spectral detail, spectral output in the red and the green and the blue. And to the human eye, if you turn on the red and the green LEDs at the same time, you get a light that kind of looks like yellow. It's not a terribly saturated yellow, but you can produce what we see as yellow. But it doesn't actually produce hardly any yellow light whatsoever in the yellow parts of the wavelengths. And as a result, this light has really bad color rendition. There's no way to mix red, green, and blue LEDs to produce anything that looks like the spectrum of daylight across the spectrum or the spectrum of incandescent light, which are both relatively flat, and they don't have peaks in them. And they certainly don't have peaks where the LEDs are. And if you look at where LEDs are, RGB LEDs put out their output versus the spectrum of skin, they kind of miss the most interesting part of where skin has absorption bands or absorption in its hemoglobin in the area right around kind of the orange yellow. And as a result, it kind of lights people funny. And if we take a look here, this is a person lit with RGB LEDs, and it's been color balanced to white. It's a person lit with white LEDs. The chart's been color balanced to white. And even though the white square of the color chart looks exactly the same under these two lighting conditions, generating the light with RGB LEDs tends to make people look more color saturated and more reddish, regardless of the skin tone, than compared to fuller spectrum illumination. And that's something that should be taken into consideration. We started working on this problem back in 2003 by building a light source that had 9 channels of illumination. It had red, green, blue, and then different colors of cyans and teals and yellow. We got yellow by taking white LEDs and putting yellow filters over them. And we built a 9-channel light so that when we mix together the 9 channels, in the middle here, this is an image that's lit with tungsten on one side, fluorescent on the other. If we reproduce that with a 9-channel light, it looks pretty close. If we do that with just an RGB light without any other color corrections, it can look very far off. And in 2016, we had an opportunity to build a new light stage with new light sources. And we built it with red, green, blue, cyan, amber, and white on every light, 6 different color channels. This is Chloe Legendre inside light stage X at USC ICT. And we developed a technique where if you shoot a light probe, that's not just a panoramic image off a mirror ball or fisheyes, but you also know what some colors look like in the scene. You can spectrally promote your RGB light probe into the information necessary to optimally drive the RGB amber, cyan, white LEDs in the light stage to match not just the colors of the light, but the color rendition of the illumination from every direction. And these results, side by side, show an actor lit with real illumination, standing outside, sun and shade on the left. And we captured the light. We had the actor step out of the scene to get a background plate. And then we reproduced that light as quickly as we could up in the light stage and composited an image of them into that background. And as you can see, they match very closely. And this is without doing any post-color correction whatsoever. Out of the box, it nails the color rendition of synthetic and natural illumination environments. And so we think as virtual production techniques mature, we'll want them to hopefully adopt more spectra of LEDs, at least a white LED, which fills in that area between red and green, and then use some math like this to drive this multi-channel illumination with what might be coming out of your game engine or your renderer, which hopefully is working in a way that has some thought toward the full spectrum of the reflective illumination. With these light stages that we can surround people with any color image of lighting that we want, it turns out there's also some useful computational illumination patterns that you can create on people. And one set of these patterns here, I'll pause this for a second, that we've been using in the Google Light stage is what we call the color gradients, because we got interested in filming not just people's texture map, but also their normal map. And using these two patterns, we built a volumetric capture system that allows us a better degree of relighting of actors than what you would get in just kind of a normal flat lit volumetric capture system. And the two lighting conditions, we call them the color gradients. One of them, you can see on the top here, has brighter red light from the right, brighter green light from above, and brighter blue light from the front. And then the next lighting condition that you can see below here has the red light from the other side, from the left, the green light comes from below, the blue light comes from behind. These are both very smooth gradients of light across the light stage. If you sum up these two lighting conditions, it's RGB white light from everywhere. But magically, because of the directionality and how we constructed it, if you subtract one lighting condition from the other and divide by the sun, it divides out the albedo of the actor, and it leaves you with something that's essentially their normal map encoded into the red, green, and blue channels of the image. And if you're recording a live normal map of somebody, that's useful for relighting, and it's also useful for producing higher quality, higher resolution geometry, because you can emboss those normals into your volumetric capture. So I was very lucky to work with the augmented perception team at Google, which developed some very high resolution depth sensors. You saw a quick image of the IR patterns on there. And then we bounced between these two lighting conditions, the two color gradients very quickly. We have 60 frame per second cameras, so we get 30 frames per second output of all of this lighting. And you can see here we've got Christoph virtually walking through some scenes in the Spruce Goose Hangar building in Playa Vista, where our Google office is. This is Sergio tossing the basketball. The basketball was also captured. You can see the level of resolution that we got in the folds of his clothing. And these actors are being, rendered with good rendering with V-Ray and global illumination into these scenes. The scenes are all CGI. This is Matt Whalen juggling. And you can see some of his, albedo map, normal map, and then rendered into the scene. And I wouldn't say that these images are quite perfect for close-ups yet, but they are high quality volumetric captures that give more maps. There's even a bit of a gloss map that you can pull out for spatially varying surface roughness out of these two images here. And we also take some pains to try to blink between the two images fast enough that nobody notices that the light is fluttering around them. We run it fast enough that they typically just see the constant white light. We've also worked on some technology at Google that we'll hope to present in more detail soon, but where you can use deep learning to illuminate a photo that's already been taken just under natural lighting conditions, using light stage data, using lots of faces, synthetically lit by the light stage in one lighting condition and then a modification made to the lighting, you can have a network estimate what a face would look like under additional lighting that wasn't there originally. And what you're seeing here is live output of a new feature that's running live in the Google Pixel phones right now called Portrait Light, where after you take a photo, you can go into the edit menu and then you can virtually move an additional light source around to basically add some fill light or to accentuate the key light of your face. And whenever the phone sees an opportunity to improve the lighting, it takes that opportunity and it does that using deep learning from the light stage data. So I'm getting toward the end of the talk here and the end of the hour, and there's one last thing I wanted to talk about, which is on the topic of light fields for virtual reality. We've talked about lighting and spheres of lots of lights. Let's talk about spheres of lots of cameras for a moment. And this whole line of research got kicked off in 2015 when Stanford had a workshop on light field imaging. And light fields had been super popular in the 90s with the original publications from Microsoft and Stanford. And they thought it was a good time to revisit it. And they revisited in the time that virtual reality was going gangbusters. Facebook had acquired Oculus. Everyone was trying to invest in this area. And it seemed like a most natural thing to do that I could present for my presentation was to end with a slide about, well, how would we shoot a good light field for virtual reality? And this is the image that I showed. It's a configuration of 100-some cameras over the sphere. And the idea is that we could use light field rendering from this data that tried to capture all the rays of light coming into the sphere of space to create virtual reality panoramic imagery that if you shift your viewpoint left or right or forward or back or up or down, the viewpoint could actually get synthesized for how you're moving your head around. And turns out this is really important because even though most virtual reality video, basically all virtual reality video out there right now, even if it's stereo and panoramic, if you move your head here, the image doesn't change its perspective, unlike everything else you see all the time in your daily life. And this is one of the causes of VR sickness. I get a little queasy in my stomach every time I almost even think of doing a shift like this while I'm watching VR video. So we wanted to find a way to solve this problem, and we knew that we'd need to have more cameras, but we also had to figure out a way to deal with the gigapixel per frame this kind of camera array would deal with, and eventually a way to show this on consumer VR hardware, even though it's so much data. So at SIGGRAPH this year, I got to work with Broxton et al., an amazing team of people at Google, to take scenes like this and record them not just as a left eye and a right eye, but as a whole volume of illumination that you can arbitrarily move the viewpoint around in after the fact. Here's another scene of our artist in residence doing some of her work. And in all these scenes, we're looking around, but we're also kind of translating the camera around. We can pause at any moment. And we intentionally film some things that include stuff like smoke and fire and thin edges and all the things that are really hard to deal with for image-based rendering. And I'll move forward a little bit here. Hopefully show, this is our camera that we came up with. We called it the Sentinel because it has a lot of kind of eyes on the front and wires coming off the back. It's actually, we built this for pretty cheap. It's about $6,000 of equipment. Each camera is about $105, a little action sports camera. The dome itself is a $200 acrylic dome. And there's 46 of these cameras. These little Yi 4K cameras came out at the height of virtual reality. So they actually added a special custom sync pin to the micro USB. And if you look at all these images here, we get 46 videos. And as we describe in the paper, we came up with a deep network that turns the scene into, instead of 46 individual videos looking in different directions, it re-represents the scene using our deep view algorithm as a set of texture mapped RGB alpha spherical shells going out from the central viewpoint. And each RGB alpha image is trained so that when you look at it from the position of any one of the original cameras, it reproduces that camera's view, but you can also move inside the sphere or between the cameras, and it generates plausible views as well. We train the algorithm by moving the rig around, perturbing it, and telling it the right answer for a certain set of scenes of what the views in between look like. And it figures out how to set RGB alpha. And when we look at the scene represented in this way, it actually, these are all the different layers. If we render them back to front really fast, it reproduces the image of the scene surprisingly well. And then to compress and transmit this, we turn it into just 16 RGB alpha images with depth maps, with kind of a conventional algorithm. And then we'll put those into a texture atlas. We don't lose too much quality by going just to 16 layers, because most scenes don't have much more depth complexity than that, or even have less depth complexity. And the final thing is that we take all of this video data, we texture atlas it so that we have consistent textures for each 2 seconds of video. We compress this low res depth map geometry into a separate stream, and we play them back. And this can work on consumer VR hardware. So if you'd like to check out some of this here, you can watch the rest of the video, but also at this website down here, and it's also off of my webpage, you'll see on the next slide, Debevec.org. It has a link to a downloadable VR demo that you can run on your VR headset that'll let you see 6 degrees of freedom, light field video of about 3 minutes of different fun scenes that we've shot. And if you don't have a VR headset fired up right now, you can see it in the web browser and move the viewpoint around yourself. So I'd like to thank Christian and the whole CVMP team. There's my email if you have some questions. There's my website, Debevec.org. And if I left enough time for questions, I am happy to take a question or two. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was spectacular. I want to start with a question from Juan from Discord. He says he's a huge fan of your research and work. Do you think there's a hope for lightweight appearance capture in the wild using physically based rendering models and machine learning based models in the near future?
Oh, well, that would be lovely. I hope you're doing research in that area, because I'd like to use that. I think physically based rendering and machine learning are a good combination. For doing things like lightweight capture and real-time stuff, physically based rendering is still kind of difficult. We're seeing the evolutions of the new graphics cards that can support ray tracing and game engines that try to expose this to people. I think that probably more successful stuff will use machine learning, and maybe there will be aspects of physically based rendering and trying to train it. But I think the machine learning itself is going to have to do some of the physically based rendering, which means it's going to learn how to kind of mimic physically based rendering effects. And we can kind of compute what you need to, on TPU stuff. Having full accurate noise-free image-based, physically based rendering inside training algorithms is possible, but it's going to be a little bit tricky. But I definitely think this is a great area to look at for the next decade of research.
So following on from that, the second part of his question was, what are your thoughts on inverse rendering using either photorealistic differentiable renderer like Mitsuba or neural rendering?
Well, that's another good question. We did quite a bit of inverse rendering, I guess, for that Parthenon project that I alluded to earlier, where we took laser scans of a Parthenon, took photos of the Parthenon, shot the lighting, and we tried to inverse render the light to get back to BRDFs and texture maps of the Parthenon as it would look under arbitrary illumination. And that worked pretty well with just conventional techniques and just using physically based rendering iteratively until the texture maps on your object plus the lighting that you've recorded reproduces under physically based rendering the images that you shot. So that seems practical to do under this kind of circumstance. Question is, are you trying to do inverse render a face, a whole environment, some interesting consumer product that could have very shiny stuff? Dealing with sharp reflections is generally difficult because in order to create images that predict those you really need to know the angles of the lighting very accurately and the full dynamic range of the lighting very accurately and the BRDFs very accurately. So we are seeing some good work with this. I think the work will get much more impressive when we see people do, things that have, both diffuse and specular and interesting BRDFs and interesting geometry.
Following on from that, Neil has a question that's very close to a question I had myself. What do you think is the main barrier right now from allowing us to reproduce full light fields in LED light stages, for example, LED walls or light stages? Like particular directional light is what I'm thinking about, but you already mentioned the light.
I love that question because that was one of the other things in the future work section of the 2002 papers. We said, really all of these lights around, not only should they be high resolution and you see images in them, they should all be light field displays. Like I love future work sections because you can just write stuff like that. And the benefit would be that you could have two actors in your scene and the illumination panels around them could light one actor differently than the other actor. Or it could, light one actor where, they're coming under a door frame. It's like one of those old Western movies and you see the light slowly move up the person's face. But for a moment, you can't quite see who they are first, right? That's something that doesn't happen automatically in an LED light stage right now. You can simulate it in post-production. You can kind of like do some fake relighting that way. One thing you could think about doing is just build your light stage. This is one of the other suggestions. Build your light stage out of video projectors instead of light sources. And video projectors are pretty bright. They're not that expensive. They'll have a lot of HDMI cables, but I think people are getting used to that. And every single projector could do spatially varying light. So if somebody's standing under a tree, you could project the light from a tree of the different leaves dappled on there. I think driving that effectively with light from sets, and kind of you have to deal with kind of hinting it onto this aliased set of video projection sources. There'd be some fun stuff to set up for that. People are also working on things that are kind of like light field displays. So like Light Field Labs, it has some folks that came out of the Litro company are working on producing actual light field displays. The Looking Glass company in New York is producing at least horizontal parallax light field displays. Maybe those things will, you could probably do a little R&D experiment trying to use those for spatially varying lighting. We can imagine in the far future that they'll be powerful enough and have the color rendition properties that would make them good illuminants too. But that'll be fun. I hope to see that happen.
And I really liked your the Sigma of Asia work that you were showing off the lighting estimation from a face. So I guess fundamentally there's a limit of the frequency of lighting you could recover from a diffuse phase, but I think there was also an older paper that you probably also remember of reconstructing the lighting environment from the eye, the reflection in the eye.
Yeah, that was a Columbia paper where the reflection in the eye. If you happen to see the eye high enough resolution, then you could figure that out. I found most of the selfies that we've thrown into the algorithm, if you look at how many pixels are across the eye, there's actually fewer pixels on the eye than the number of pixels that we are estimating already. So you have to be pretty lucky for that technique to already have a surprisingly high resolution image of the eye. And then there's still dynamic range and field of view issues and such too. We could do more analysis, and I'd like to, of just how high frequency illumination you can get off of the human face. The fact that, that our skin is somewhat specular, and that there are some concavities, particularly the nose and the shadows that it produces. It seems clear that we're able to get, more than 9 spherical harmonics off of a face. Are we getting 25 spherical harmonics? Are we getting 49 spherical harmonics? Not quite sure where it ends, but what we do to get the last level of detail, because you might say, like, be doing an AR application and you want to put like a shiny helmet on somebody, right? And make them like a knight, and you need higher resolution reflections for that. That's where the generative adversarial network comes in, that's seen what lots of lighting environments look like, and it kind of, hallucinates one that's consistent with the illumination that is available on the face, and then it kind of makes the rest up. that might be the way that you have to go for stuff.
That's true. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for your time, for your presentation, for answering our questions. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of everybody who's watching on the live stream. Unfortunately, we do not have an audio effect for 90 people clapping, but I would play that now.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure, and have a great rest of your CVMP. It's great to be here. Thanks.